Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 387, the second to the last episode of the year. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today, I'm going to talk about wrapping up the year, seasons changes, and that kind of thing. I was really debating about what to talk about this week, and I was feeling like I didn't want to go with a purely kind of nature, outdoors adventure episode, but I wanted to talk more about this time of year that we're in and changes that are happening and new cycles and new things. And I think that's really important. You may have noticed from my emails or from things I've been talking about on the podcast that I recently released a book, which is my yearly planner called The Year You Want. Imagine your best life and design your ideal year so you don't leave your life to chance. And this is based on the process that I use every year to kind of wrap up the current year and get ready to plan the things that I want to experience in the new year. And this has been a really powerful process for me over the last few years. And it's been a really important part of my life to make sure that I do all the things that I want to do and I have all the experiences I want to have and I achieve all of my goals. Not every year do I achieve all my goals. And this year was one of those years, which I'm sure it was for many people, where lots of unexpected things happened and things did not work out as planned. So a lot of my goals just were impossible. They didn't happen. There was some travel I wanted to do to write 2 books on the Camino. I wanted to walk the Camino Portugués and the Camino Inglés. Neither of those obviously happened. And so I'm putting those off until 2022 because next year is a holy year and there will be a lot of people on the trails. Kickboxing black belt grading, that didn't happen. We did have a kind of modified kind of winter course a couple weekends ago where we did the grading for the line work and the fitness aspects of the grading, and I passed that, barely, but I did pass. So I'm very pleased about that. So that's kind of a step towards that goal. And, I replaced the Camino with the Ridgeway, which was fantastic. I was planning to walk it next year, and I just kind of bumped that up. And I did all kinds of other things, but this was a year where I had to completely reevaluate a lot of my goals. And so it really helped me to have this system, kind of look through what were the goals that I set, which goals are still viable, and which goals need to be put off till next year or the following year. And what am I going to do instead? And I have a whole podcast episode about that. But that's kind of what I'm feeling now, so I wanted to talk about that with you. I've also been feeling lately, the last couple days in particular, really tired. And I think I've been talking about this a lot with my friend Joanna Hennon. And this has been a stressful year for everyone, again, because of the uncertainty, because of the changes. And also I've had some uncertainty with clients that we work with and just so tired. And so as I record this, I've got this workation planned for later this week. And then hopefully going to take it easy for the next couple of weeks. You will obviously have a podcast because I never miss a week on this podcast. But I'm going to take it easy and start planning the next year. But before then, the day that this goes live, Monday, the 21st, is solstice. It's winter solstice. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that before I get into other things. So the winter solstice is also known as Alban Arthun by modern Druid traditions. It's a time of the year, solstice means standstill. So it's a time where the sun appears to rise and set in more or less the same place for a few days. The actual solstice is our shortest day of the year, our longest night of the year. And then after that, the days start to get a little bit longer and the nights start to get a little bit shorter. So it's like a new cycle of life is beginning. And I know I've talked a little bit about Samhain, or October 31st being the new year, but there are many new cycles throughout the year. So it's not just that one new year. We've also got this new cycle. We have a very clear shift between shorter days to longer days. And it's something that you can see every day as you look out the window and you realize the days are getting longer. And so a lot of solstice celebrations or ceremonies have to do with banishing the dark and welcoming back the light and welcoming in this new cycle, this kind of rebirth. So apparently, up until fairly recently, people celebrated this festival for 2 weeks, with kind of peaks in the festivals on December 25th, January 1st, January 6th. And this was the origin of the 12 days of Christmas. So obviously this is in, post-Christian times. But these were the dark months of the year. Historically, these were times when people didn't have a lot of work, if they were kind of manual laborers. And this was the time to kind of rest and celebrate and call in this new cycle. And I think that's why a lot of us feel the need to kind of go into hibernation at this time of the year, or really just wind down and take a break and rest and recharge and get ready for that new cycle. So if you're feeling that as well, that's very natural. You're not the only person. And I know this because I've been talking to lots of friends about this lately. We're all kind of experiencing something similar. Just this real need to rest, especially after this year, which has been such a strange year and full of stress for a lot of people. I just got an email from a friend the other day who lost his job. That's happened to a lot of people. A lot of people are losing work. A lot of people are having to change the way they do things, having to rethink the way they do things. So it's been a time of unrest and stress, and it's very natural to want to rest at this time of year. And I think the fact that travel is still restricted for a lot of people means that a lot of people may have more rest this holiday season than they ever have before, because there probably won't be as many celebrations, and family get-togethers and things will be a lot smaller, and if they're happening at all. I mean, my husband and I always have a very quiet Christmas, with the exception of last year when we had family visiting, but we're going back to that quiet Christmas this year, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. So on this longest night of the year, tonight, which is when this goes live, there are different ways you can celebrate this. I'm planning to go on a long run throughout the day so I can spend time in nature and just really be outdoors. But then at night, what can you do? You might want to go through the house and turn off all the lights and just spend some time feeling into this darkness and feeling into how that darkness feels and what comes up for you. And then you might want to light a candle and then take that candle around your house from room to room. You might want to relight candles in each room. If you don't have that many candles, you might, turn on a light. I know candles are much more romantic than electrical lighting, but the fact is we live in a modern world. So you might want to light those rooms in the modern way, little by little, or do it by candlelight, which is lovely. Celebrate this new cycle of light. Celebrate this new cycle of longer days, of rebirth. If you garden, you might want to look through a seed catalog, or look through a plant catalog, or think about what you might do with your garden in the new year. You might want to have a drink in celebration of this rebirth of the year, of this longer days. There are so many different ways that you can have a small little ceremony to celebrate. I really like the idea of turning out all the lights in the house and going through and relighting candles. My house is really small, so that's quite easy. But think about what you might want to do, or maybe just sit and reflect on this new cycle. And perhaps see how you might want to spend some time in nature on Monday, today, as this goes live. Whether that's going out for a little walk or going out to a local park or just walking around your town or going for a run or a bike ride or whatever. Maybe spend some time outside, and maybe spend some time outside as it's getting dark so that you can really feel what it's like as the day gets darker and darker and darker. And then you might go home when it's purely dark and then light some candles around the house. Try to get outdoors on these festivals. That's what I do. If that's your thing, might be a new tradition for you. So, as you're looking into wrapping up this year and reflecting on your year, there are a lot of things that you can look at. And I find this really, really useful, a really useful kind of personal ritual to do. And I find it really impossible to plan my new year without wrapping up the current year. So I usually start out by doing kind of a mind dump. In my journal or in this planner that I've written, just write pages, kind of like morning pages if you've ever done those. Like, what was the year like for me? And I just write down everything that comes to my mind. I just let it all out, get it out of my head and onto paper. And I find that really useful and sometimes surprising to see what comes up. And then I go through my old journals from the last 12 months. I actually haven't been writing in my journal as much as I used to, mostly because I kind of abandoned my morning ritual this year. I really shifted out of doing that for a long, long time. So that meant I wasn't writing my journal as much. But go through your old journals from the last 12 months, if you have them, and just look at what stands out and read through some of the stuff that you wrote and remind yourself of how you were feeling and what was going on for you. I also find this to be really surprising sometimes. And then what I do is I review my oracle card spread that I did last year to predict the themes for this year. So what I do is I pull an oracle card, 13, one card for each month, and then one for an overarching theme for the year. And I kind of look at those. I write it all down in my journal, or now I'm going to be writing it down in this book. And I look at it throughout the year, and I kind of see how things are matching up, and I look at the months to come, and I look at the themes, and I kind of get ready for what might come, because this has always been really, really accurate for me in terms of the overarching themes for each month. And then I look at my list of goals and projects, something I've been doing throughout the year. Probably more this year than any other year, just because I've had to kind of readjust and change things. But I look at, did I achieve all of my goals? Did I complete all of my projects and my plans? One thing I'm not good at doing is celebrating my achievements. And that's why I added this to the planner, if the year you want, to remind myself that it's important to celebrate. So in the planner, I say, celebrate the goals you achieved. And then I have a spot to write down, how do you plan to celebrate them? I look at which achievements I'm most proud of. I really did a lot of work this year on my writing and my publishing. I achieved most of my goals and beyond. And so I'm really, really pleased at that. So that's something I'm going to be celebrating. And then sometimes, we have goals and we take some action towards the goals and we don't achieve them. But there's still goals that we want to achieve, maybe next year or in the future. And so I think it's important to look at this as foundations. So maybe we didn't complete the process and achieve the goal, but we've laid the foundations for achieving that goal in the future. We've taken some action, we've done some work, and that will make it easier to advance on that path next year or next month or whenever it is that we decide to continue to take action toward that goal. And I think that's a really important mindset to have. If you haven't achieved a goal, that's not a failure. You've just laid the foundation to work toward that goal in the future, if you choose to do so. Now, sometimes there are some goals that you might look at and say, you know what, that's no longer important to me. My life has changed. I've grown. I've moved on from that. I really don't care about that. And so that's another important thing, is to look at the goals that you didn't achieve and think, do I want to do this or not? And if you don't want to do it anymore, that's absolutely fine. Just because you set a goal doesn't mean you have to achieve it, because things change and we move on. And sometimes things are no longer relevant. So please do not count that as a failure. You know, I trained in NLP almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And I remember one of the first things that you learn is the NLP presuppositions. And one of the things that I loved about that was there's no failure, only feedback. So if you haven't achieved a goal, it's not a failure. It's just feedback that either it wasn't a big enough priority, or you made other things priorities, or it's no longer important to you, or something else. But it's important to kind of look at why. What is the feedback you get from not having achieved that goal? And then I like to look at the big picture of the year. Like, what were the overarching themes? If you had to describe your year 2020 in 3 words, what would they be? I posted this on Instagram a while back and got, a few people responding with their 3 words, and it was really interesting. Were there any overarching themes for the year? How do you feel about this year? Just kind of get the big picture for what this year was like for you. And I like to look at my challenges, like what challenges came up this year? What obstacles came up? How did I overcome them? What mistakes did I make? And what did I learn from them? Again, there's no failure, only feedback. What did you learn from these things? Growth. Well, how did you grow this year? What new things did you learn? And that could be life lessons, or that could be like online courses that you took, or, in-person courses. What did you learn this year? And what did you learn about yourself this year? How did your mindset shift this year? I think that's another really important thing, to look at how our perspective, how our mindset has changed. Did you do any mindset work? And what did you change as a result? I like to look at health and wellness. How did that improve? How did that decline? What do I need to do? What do I feel like doing for my health? Career, business, how did that go? That's always kind of one of the things that's like at the forefront of my mind in terms of goal setting and things. But I think it's important to look at our year in so many other aspects as well. So health and wellness is really important. Personal life, people in your lives, friends and family. How did your relationships change this year? I think a lot of people have had some shifts in relationships, both partners and friends. A lot of people haven't been able to see their friends as much as they would have. Travel, again, that's something that didn't happen very much this year, but that's something I look at. Where are the places that I traveled to that I enjoyed? Where do I want to think about traveling? And travel was very different this year because it was really challenging to travel internationally. I canceled everything, but I was still able to travel within the country, thankfully. The Ridgeway was a big, big thing for me this year, and it really kind of boosted my spirits. After we had that first lockdown and before the second lockdown, I'm really, really pleased that I was able to get out and do that. So travel was an important part of my year, even though I didn't do the kind of travel that I thought. And another thing I really like to do is go through my calendar, or you could do this with your journal, but I do it with my calendar, and week by week, I go through and I write down all my major activities. Did they feel light or did they feel heavy? Did they feel positive or did they feel negative? And this is something I found really, really useful. I found it useful to look at how many things in my life, like what's the balance like? Do I have mostly light things? Do I have mostly heavy things? And last year when I did this, I remember it was overwhelmingly positive. But the things that were heavy were things that, like I had very few things on the heavy list, but there were things that had taken up a lot of my year. And so that was very easy for me to see that these were things that I wanted to change my relationship to, or change how I approach them, or try to eliminate them from my life. Gratitude, I look at the things that I'm grateful for. And I know a lot of people resist gratitude work, but I find it really useful. So I do like to do a section of gratitude for no matter how difficult the year was, we've always got something to be grateful for. And I find that's a really helpful thing to kind of shift my mindset and see the positive. And then finally, I look at the decade. Now, I know this kind of work was really popular last year because, we were moving into 2020. But I think it's very useful to do that every year. So to look at the last 10 years and look at the overarching themes of each year and look at what changed and what you did and kind of keep those in mind as well. I think the decade review is really important. And of course, if you do that every year, that's only going to shift by 1 year every year. But I think it's an important thing to look at. So I've included that in this book because, I think it's important to look at our previous decade. And that also helps us to think about the next decade, the coming decade. Like, what kinds of things do we want to plan for our future decade? And I think that's really important as well, because I think it can be easy to plan the coming year, but not really think about our vision for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and beyond. And I do have a podcast episode on goal setting for each decade of our lives. And I will put that in the show notes. And then finally, I just look at what kinds of things do I want to keep in mind from this year as I move into the new year, as I move into this new cycle, as I plan this new year. What do I want to let go of before I move on? What do I need to release? And what do I want to replace it with? That is the point where you start planning the new year. So I hope you found this useful. I was kind of walking you through some of the process that I use, which I've included in this book, but I think these are really important things to consider. And I think that having some kind of ritual or ceremony or just journaling to reflect on our year is really important. I mean, I've said this so many times, but for the first 35 years of my life, I was just kind of coasting. I didn't really set goals. I didn't really make plans. Life just happened. And that's a terrible way to live. So things have really shifted for me in the last 10 years when I started reflecting on my life and planning the things that I wanted to experience. So I don't know what I'm going to be talking about next week, but I suspect it might be shifting into this new year. We'll see, because I've got lots of good outdoorsy stuff happening over the holidays. I've got a half marathon and I've got some walking and running goals to achieve. So we'll see. We'll see. As I said, I've been feeling a little bit tired lately, so I might just scrap it all and rest. Except for the half marathon. That's paid for and in the calendar, and I'm definitely doing that because I'm really, really curious to experience this route that this company does. They do a lot of races in my town and in this place where I'm going to be doing my half marathon, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing what it's like running that route because it's a very flat route, and I wonder what that's going to be like for a longer run. Because I'm so used to kind of doing hills because I live in a hilly area. So that's me. What about you? What are you going to be doing to wrap up this year and let go of it so you can move on into the future? Please feel free to email me. Let me know what you thought about this episode, but also let me know what you're doing to kind of wrap up the year and move on. You can always email me at holly@hollyworton.com, or you can find me online and get in touch there. I do get Facebook messages from people from time to time and Instagram messages and that kind of thing. So also I wanted to mention, if you are a patron, you will get the ebook version of The Year You Want for free. Now, I usually only give ebooks to patrons at a certain level, but this one I'm giving to all of my patrons. So if you haven't yet signed up for Patreon and you'd like to, you can go to patreon.com/Holly Worton and you can join me there. Membership starts at just $1 a month and you will get the ebook planner for that amount. If you would prefer to get the printed planner or workbook, I will share the links to that in the show notes. Up until now, I've always released all of my workbooks only as print because it seemed obvious to me that that would be the right way to do it because the whole point is having like a book to write down your answers. And then it occurred to me that some people might want to write down their answers in their main journal. So that's why I've produced the ebook for this. And I might actually go back and produce ebooks for all of my other workbooks as well. That's one more thing to do. So I might add that to my list for this workcation. So that's it. Patreon, if you want to join me there, that's patreon.com/Holly Worton. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a really beautiful solstice. I hope you manage to get outdoors a little bit. And I would love to hear about whatever little ceremony or ritual or thing you might do to celebrate this new cycle. So get in touch and let me know. And remember to visit hollyworton.com/387 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.